I came of age professionally in the 1990s, and like many women my age, I am ambivalent about feminism as it is currently practiced. My cohort and I well remember watching feminist leaders stand by their man in the late 1990s by throwing a young woman our own age under the bus for the crime of not knowing her job was to service their ally. After declaring her desire to fellate the former president for his stand on abortion, journalist Nina Burleigh said, "I think American women should be lining up with their presidential knee pads on to show their gratitude for keeping the theocracy off our backs." The same women who venerated Anita Hill earlier that decade when the politics suited them viciously hounded a young woman at the beginning of her career when the politics didn't. When I saw leading women from feminist organizations standing behind Bill Clinton at his Rose Garden pep rally after the House of Representatives impeached him, I realized they didn't care about women like me. All they cared about was their power and keeping it, and I've refused to call myself a feminist ever since. In a recent National Review article, Sarah Quinlan argues that conservatives should not dismiss outright the ideas and concerns of feminists. In today's political climate, that's a very hard ask. The rhetoric of left-wing feminists is often strident, off-putting, and sometimes silly. It's hard to take their denouncements of the patriarchy seriously when their protests involve stunts like stripping down to their underwear in front of a classroom to protest standards of appropriate dress or dragging a mattress around campus and up on stage for graduation to protests rape culture. We roll our eyes at this performance art pretending to be a real conversation, but we also let it get in the way of more serious things we need to talk about. Quinlan is right to call that out. Conservatives do need to make the effort to sift through the noise and find the important messages about the experiences of women in our society. There are valid concerns there. But what do you do when the gatekeepers who claim to own the conversation on women's issues refuse to engage with you? Feminist spokesperson Jessica Valenti argues in the New York Times that feminism is not for everyone, and women who do not adhere to current feminist orthodoxy, they are defined by Valenti as conservative women, have no place in the movement and cannot rightly call themselves feminists. In fact, doing so would be tantamount to conservative appropriation of the feminist label. This appropriation must be guarded against by the real feminists to, protect the movement. Interestingly, by Valenti's definition of proper feminist thought, early suffragettes like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton would be banned from the club for their unfortunate pro-life tendencies. I don't want the feminist label, so Valenti can feel free to keep it, but it is important that conservatives in general and conservative women in particular not abandon the conversation on women's issues to the feminists on the left. They have a very narrow focus of acceptable ideas and solutions, and in our diverse and dispersed country, we are going to need plenty of ideological room to solve our problems. In a recent interview, Arthur Brooks, president of the American Enterprise Institute, discussed how the polarization of our politics has had negative societal effects of a broader kind. Our marketplace of ideas, which is supposed to be a rich buffet of intellectual options, is depleted, and our collective entrepreneurial spirit, which is supposed to be propelled by innovative ideas, is impeded. As Brooks told Politico, Americans are being held hostage and terrorized by the fringes. It's not like 50% of Americans thinks one thing and 50% thinks another thing. No, 15% on each side are effectively controlling the conversation and 70% of us don't hate each other. It's time for the 70% in the middle to tune out the folks shouting from the fringes and start talking to each other. Go where you're not welcome. Brooks exhorts in The Conservative Heart. People who need converting are not converted when we don't leave the house. That is what we need to do, leave the house. We need to get out in our communities and work with those who share the same goals we do, even if they have different ideas on how to get there. Some will deride this message as Pollyannish, but I see it happen every day. I am the chair of the Georgia Commission on Women, a nonpartisan state agency, where women from across the political spectrum set aside our differences to work on our shared goals. It is not always easy, and there have been times I've had to bite my tongue when working with outside groups who don't share my politics, but we have been effective in advocating for stronger human trafficking laws in our state, teaching about women's health issues, and working to improve access to health care in rural areas. The key, though, is personal commitment and personal connections. Yelling at people to try to win them to our side never works. On a macro level, as we build trust in our communities on the middle ground issues, we lay the foundation for the harder work on the more controversial ones. If Brooks is right about polarization's effects, if tribalism is indeed fueling certain destructive social outcomes, then reversing some of its worst tendencies should represent a step in the right direction. The left and the right are never going to agree on abortion, but that doesn't mean there can't be remarkable levels of convergence on other issues. Can agree on the need to fight human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. We all want women to have adequate access to healthcare providers. Almost a quarter of the women in my state have to drive more than an hour for prenatal care, and we can pressure state leaders to work out solutions. We all want our young women to be safe on college campuses. We want them to be confident in themselves and their abilities, and we want them to have equal educational opportunities. We want to be certain the playing field is level in the workplace and women are compensated fairly. We want women to work in environments free from misogyny and harassment. We want women to have the tools and flexibility they need to build strong families. Why is the above not enough for Valenti? Why should a person who holds the above beliefs find themselves cut off from being able to lock arms with feminists who by and large want each and every one of those outcomes? When you get down to brass tacks, the right and left want many of the same things, but identity politics and strict enforcement of doctrinaire thought on how these issues should be resolved has harmed our ability to have the conversations we need to meet our common goals. George W. Bush said, "Too often, we judge other groups by their worst examples while judging ourselves by our best intentions, forgetting the image of God we should see in each other." I am guilty of this more times than I would care to admit, and I have to make a concerted effort to tune out the Nina Burleighs and Jessica Valentis of the world. It seems like the loudest people often have the worst ideas, and social media works like a megaphone to amplify their voices. It's intellectually lazy to paint one end of the political spectrum with a broad crazy brush based on the ideas of their political fringe, but it's oh so tempting. However, it is harder to vilify people you have a personal relationship with, so getting out in the community with others who are passionate about the same things you are helps. And as for that person from high school you friended on Facebook in a fit of nostalgia who is the fringe of the fringe, just unfollow her and move on if her rants leave you unmotivated to work with the other side. In my mind, feminism in its purest form is about the equality of women in society, in the workplace, and before the law. It's about equal opportunity and equal rights, and it's about acknowledging the uniqueness of women and how we experience the world. I realize this won't get me past the gatekeepers of the feminist club, but I don't care. I'm going to keep talking about women's issues anyway, and I hope other conservatives, both male and female, will continue talking as well. Conservative ideals have much to offer women, and when we concede the conversation to one point of view, it's women who lose. Women benefit from policies that foster strong family formation. We benefit from a robust economy and low taxes. We benefit from occupational licensing reform that reduces barriers to entry for small women-owned businesses. We benefit from healthy communities and civic life. We, as conservative thinkers, need to do a better job of talking about how our policies are beneficial to women and take back the narrative from those on the left who limit women's choices to their particular dogma. I encourage conservatives to embrace and promote women's equality and leave the labels out of it. However, if you are a woman on the right and want to call yourself a feminist, go for it. It's a free country, appropriate away. The self-anointed keepers of feminist holy writ have no business telling you that you can't. I hope we will all do, regardless of how we want to label ourselves, is be vigilant about ensuring women are treated fairly. We do that by joining with our sisters in our communities, even the ones we don't always see eye to eye with, and focusing on making life better for the women around us who need help. While conservatives don't necessarily need to embrace feminism, they would do well to heed the advice Abigail Adams gave her husband, John. In the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. The lives of your mothers, sisters, daughters, and friends will be better for it.